Welcome to Access to Perspectives Conversations, the podcast for bridging academic landscapes. At Access to Perspectives, we provide novel insights into the communication and management of research. Our goal is to equip researchers around the world with the skills and enthusiasm they need to pursue a successful career. You will get insights around the topics of scholarly reading, writing and publishing, career development, project management and research integrity, all embedded into open science practices. Learn more about our work at accesstoperspectives.org.
Here we are. So, welcome everyone. We have another episode of the Access to Perspectives conversation. Today, we are, here with me is Mark Young, Dr. Mark Young, the founder and director of Rational Games, which is a consultancy firm for negotiation skills, in short, also much more. And I'm very happy to have you here with me today, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Joe. Nice to be here.
And we met, maybe for those who know me a little bit, or you can also find this on the About Me page. After my PhD, I did a training for over a year at a MacArthur Fellowship program, which introduced me to the opportunity to work for international organizations. In my case, it was the United Nations Environment Program in Kenya, Nairobi, and also the IPAC. So I was also working in South Africa for the Indigenous Peoples of Africa Coordinating Committee in Cape Town. And that was facilitated through the fellowship program, in which I also had the opportunity to learn from you about negotiation skills. And I'm still a big fan of the things you shared with us in the short but very impactful time we had together. As glad as then to be able to today share some of your wisdom with our listeners. So with that said...
Thank you. That's very generous. I'm glad it was useful. So what would you like to know? I mean, how I got into this or something like
maybe
that?
to warm up a little on this article, to introduce yourself to the listeners a bit more. So what brought you into negotiation and in your path, in your professional path and career?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a very varied career in a different sequence than usual. I started life studying philosophy. I studied it as a BA, and then I went to business school, and then I went to work for two large and famous American banks that don't exist anymore. And then I went to McKinsey for 4 years, and then I did various things. And at the end of all that, I did a sabbatical and went back to school to the Humboldt University and did a PhD in philosophy, with a practical aspect. And I actually did a double. I had two doctoral supervisors. One was in the philosophy department and the other was in the business department. The idea was the bridge. And what was interesting to start with is that they didn't really ever talk to each other. They didn't know each other. They were several blocks apart in the same university, but it was two different worlds. And that was already very interesting. And what attracts me to it, and it was very clear in that experience as well, is I love philosophy. The art of wondering, the art of thinking things through. But I'm very interested in applied philosophy. I'm not so interested in thinking about whether God exists and free will and these things. But I want something that actually has a connection to the real world. And negotiation does. Negotiation is one of the areas where philosophy meets the real world. Philosophy is about why do people behave the way they do? What is rationality? What is ethics? But negotiation is the application of that in a very relevant and practical way, because everybody negotiates 5 or 6 times a day. And so it's certainly I don't have to explain to anyone why it's relevant. And I like that. I like this connection. So I went from the PhD in philosophy. I went to Harvard for a year and did some work with the program on negotiation. The people there who wrote the book Getting to Yes, probably the most famous book about negotiation ever written. Not the only way to negotiate, certainly, but it's the one we like. And we had the idea to found our company, Rational Games, in 2001. It was when I was in Cambridge. And the idea was to do negotiation skills training using playful methods. We're great believers in the power of games. So we don't do much lecturing, we don't do much PowerPoint, we do experiential learning with theatrical methods and all sorts of crazy things. And because you learn a lot more that way, it's a lot more fun. And we believe very deeply that negotiation is a game. And a game has rules, and a game is there to be played and enjoyed. It's not something stressful, it's not something unpleasant. And my main aim in seminars is to show people that it can be fun, that it isn't, because many of them come in very apprehensive about, it's very stressful, I don't like it, I'm afraid of it. And if I can pull that tooth, as the Germans say, that is my main aim in these seminars. So yeah, so we've been doing that for 24 years in 40 countries around the world, not only on Zoom, also live. And we work in Germany with the foreign ministry, with the new diplomats. We work with the Mercator Foundation, where I met you. We work with one of the parties in the Bundestag. We work with CEOs, with startups, with foundations, and all sorts of people. But the theme is always win-win negotiation. It's collaborative. It's about, making the pie bigger, as we keep saying, creating value, getting what you want, but also not damaging the relationship. So it's the idea, it's the anti-Donald Trump approach to negotiation. And I have found, and I think this is where your question is going, that is true in pretty much all sectors. I mean, I certainly teach classic commercial negotiation between companies. We have several blue chip clients that we work with senior management. I also teach in the diplomatic world. I teach the new diplomats in Germany, and I've also taught diplomats in Korea and other places. I teach in just personal negotiations, and I teach quite a bit in the academic sector. And I think there's an awful, people say, what is the difference between them? And there are differences, and I'm sure we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But I think largely the fundamental themes are always the same. How do you figure out what you want? How do you create value? How do you build trust with the other side? How do you build a relationship? How do you come to an agreement that's lasting, that won't go away after a few weeks? That's always true in all of these sectors. The currency changes. I mean, very famously, academics don't have so much money, but I find they're far more competitive than business. That's perhaps an interesting quote for this. Business people look at the money, the financial return, and that's pretty clear. Academics don't really argue about money. They argue about position. They argue about influence. They argue whose name is going to be on the publication on the left side. That's a lot more abstract, but it's just as competitive as anything you'll find at Microsoft or anywhere else.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's also what many academics say they experience, and they didn't expect that it's so competitive. Because
it's cutthroat. It depends on the environment, but it can be cutthroat. It can be really seriously competitive.
And it's funny because, like you said, like, people don't expect to earn loads of money in academia, but then there's other incentives that, because the comfort of having not just enough, but a comfortable amount of money as a return for the effort, then there is maybe a deeper urge to get compensation for the effort, and finding that in other means like prestige or.
Yeah, I mean, it's not in money, because most universities, certainly outside the US, but even in the US, there's only a certain amount they can pay. It's not close to what you would get in business, and people willingly give up business careers like I did and go into that. I'm not in academia myself, not actively, but I work a lot with academia, and there the currency is simply power. I think it's positions, it's the size of your office, it's the whether the goodies you get, the trips you get to take, what your name on publications. That's what drives. We talk a lot about icebergs in the Harvard method, knowing what's in people's icebergs. There's their position, what they say they want, and their interest, which is what they really want.
Mm.
And the iceberg of academics is different than the iceberg of business people.
Yeah.
No less competitive. Yeah.
Yeah, no less competitive, but academics tend to pride ourselves. I put myself there. I used to be academic, no entrepreneur. So I don't know where I'm standing, like in between both feet in the other bucket. Whereas, oh, we're not, it's not about money for me, it's for the cause, it's for my research projects, for an interest. But then we still have to eat and put food on the table for our people. And yeah, I mean, it is a kind of reward. So maybe we shouldn't go too much into that, but it's also part of why people fight or compete.
Yeah, sure.
So
Well, let me just say,
Okay.
I also work a lot in the nonprofit sector, so that's different again. But academics, in my view, they're not saints. They're not,
No,
you
no, I'm
know,
not saying
giving
that.
up money. They want things, they want, the fruits of their labor. And it's just not cash, but it's other things. So it's not nonprofit. It's not, Seelsorge in German. It's competitive, you know. So you want
Reputation, like
tenure.
all about
You-
reputation building, establishing yourself as the expert on that topic, and how can you show that you've reached. So, yeah.
And most academics, in my view, have sizable egos, and they like to be appreciated. They like to be,
Once they make it.
honored. They like to be, have other people praise them, and they want symbols of that, whether it's a big office or whether it's a Festschrift or whether it's whatever it is that gives them recognition. And that's the key thing that's in their icebergs, unlike business people or diplomats, for instance.
Yeah, but maybe it's also to compensate for the lack of financial means that they get.
Yeah.
I mean, enough thereof.
Well,
So,
in general, they're more highly educated than people in the other sectors. And so they feel they should be, paid for that or honored for that in some way, compensated, that's the word. Um, yeah, but I also find, as I think about this question, that having a PhD isn't all that helpful in negotiation. It doesn't make you a better negotiator.
no, for
Um,
sure. Yeah.
Knowing a lot of stuff, having read a lot of research papers written, published, all of that doesn't really train the skills you need. And the skills you need in negotiation are, number one is empathy, really understanding what people want and why they want it, and not immediately reacting to what they say. And that's a skill that I think other professions are much better at. Counseling, certainly, psychotherapy, those people are much more trained in that skill than academics are. Academics talk a lot, they're always talking. So they don't listen as much as they should, and then they don't negotiate very well.
Huh. All right. So on your website, the first thing that people see is the phrase, the human urge to play is greater than the urge to fight. What? And
What is that?
You say that firmly and like with deep, well, you say you're
Well,
deeply convinced on that. And
that's the foundation of our company. I did a TEDx talk a few years ago with that theme, and we believe firmly that the evidence shows that certainly people fight all over the world. They're fighting in Gaza, they're fighting in Ukraine. That will never go away. That's part of human nature. But people also like to play. And it's a very, very deep need. And if you look at the TED Talk, you'll see we talk about, infants that play with their toes in the crib. We talk about senior citizens that play bingo. They play, play, play. We love soccer. We love tournaments. We love Duolingo. We love all sorts of ways that people want to play. It's a very deep-seated urge. And what my company or my life work, you could say, we're trying to harness that power of play that is in every person and use it to resolve conflict. And we've had some luck with that. What we do in my firm is we teach negotiation to all of these people using playful methods, but then we turn around. We are a registered nonprofit in Germany and in the US, and we make grants and we support projects that use games and play in the nonprofit sector to solve conflict. It started with things like soccer in Africa for kids from different tribes to come together, play soccer, learn fair play, learn to trust each other. We have an ice hockey project in East Berlin, started by a former East German athlete who was 6 when the wall came down. Now he's 50. And he founded something called Kick on Ice. It's ice hockey. They pick up problem kids from the streets of Berlin and take them to the stadium and teach them ice hockey. And the aggression goes into a puck and not into a knife or a gun. So that's another example of using play to absorb aggression and to reduce conflict. We work with Musicians Without Borders. We do projects all over the world, in Brazil, in Congo, in various places, using music, using dance, using theater, using film, anything creative, and sports, anything creative that brings people together. So that's what that sentence means, that we really do think that if you can harness the power of play, and I see this, I started teaching seminars and to very senior, very, very important people. And I found that as soon as I stopped the PowerPoint and stopped lecturing and let them play, do role plays, that the room came alive. And they loved it. And you can't believe what I have gotten people to do just by harnessing play. They role play, the other sex, they dance, they play funny games on Zoom. We do things with funny sounds. People love it because it speaks to a human need. And so I believe more and more in the reality of that. And the question is, how can you use it to solve conflict in the nonprofit sector, but also in business? And I do a lot of coaching as well in the Bundestag for looking at Gesetzesentwürfe, at laws to see, well, how can we get what we want in the language? So the currency varies a lot. For the business people, it's usually money. For diplomats, it's language, it's formulations, it should or shall. For academics, it's symbols of power, I would say. But it's always the same. You want something, and I try to get you to make the pie bigger so you get what you want, but they get what they want. And you have a relationship, which is in academics also perhaps even more important, because real career academics know each other for 40 years. They go to the same conferences over and over. And if you win at a negotiation at someone's expense, it gets around. And there you go back to the word reputation, which is the main interest of most academics. And you don't want to ruin your reputation by being a cheat or by being dominant and unfriendly and unfair.
Yeah.
So that, I think, makes academics behave more than business people do. I'll say that.
Oh, so you think academics behave more decent as compared to business people?
Well, I'm not sure they're more decent, but they are more careful. They're more careful about how they express their aggression. Yeah.
Interesting.
I should say, I have several really interesting clients. It's mostly, one of them is in Switzerland. The other one I just did last week in Heidelberg. And they are organizations that work with doctoral and postdoctoral candidates, all sorts of fields. And they come into my course, and it's always a lot of fun because we have neurophysicists, we have political scientists, we have historians, we have engineers, we have veterinarians, all sorts of backgrounds, and they're all highly intelligent and very skilled, but they don't know much about negotiation. So that the combination of all of those backgrounds with what I know is quite exciting to find.
So if you would boil down the negotiation to its core, is it, like you mentioned, empathy is important, an important skill to have in the set. So is it really about like stepping outside your own interests alone and then seeing the others and then finding, like, I don't think it's a compromise you're seeking, but what's the
Well, the academics call it perspective taking, which is slightly different from empathy, but that's one piece of it. One piece of it is the ability to see things from their perspective without being from their perspective.
Stepping into the other
empathy too much empathy is damaging in negotiation. You don't want to be so empathetic that you'll give them anything so that they'll stop crying.
Sure.
That's not what it's really understanding what they're saying, what they're feeling, what their body language tells you, as if you were them, without really being them, without letting go of what you want. And that's a very central skill in negotiation. Not the only one. Other skills are strategic thinking, knowing how to get from A to B, and how to do it in sequence. It's relationship building, very important. Social skills are very important in negotiation. It's following rules. It's diplomacy. And it's joy. I think joy is a skill really in negotiation. People that really enjoy what they're doing. That's very powerful. Yeah.
Wow, that's a struggle chord. Because joy, I think, is something that comes up as you experience something joy, but you can also force joy. What are you saying?
You
By
can fake joy.
you can
You
fake
know,
it.
I can't help but think of Kamala Harris, poor thing, what she just went through. And she founded her campaign on joy, and I think she was convincing with that. I think that was genuine. It didn't work, but she didn't win. But I think she showed that you can be tough, very tough. She's a prosecutor,
Yeah.
and also be warm and humorous and laugh a lot. That I think is a pretty good combination, not just for politics, but for negotiation. So I thought, I wish she'd won, but she didn't. But you know, I think she demonstrated some skills that are very important for negotiation.
And is that what speaks again for us, human nature, to be seen and to be liked, to be adored is maybe too much said, but to be appreciated for who we are, where we're coming from, to be seen. As in, like when you say you have two parties who seem to have contradictory aims and goals, but then each of them is coming from, and they put in their interests. They want to achieve something based on the constraints and opportunities they have in the
And
basket.
that's already common ground. They both want a deal for whatever reason. So that's already something that they share. And I do mediation work as well, and there I can say that if you start with positions that are always far apart, I say yes, you say no, I say black, you say white, that's how it always starts. But if you then go into the icebergs, as we put it, and you look at interests which are much fuzzier and not so clear cut, you very often find that the interests are not all in conflict. You find there are shared interests that they didn't even know they had. And so if you work on that, then you start to have a foundation for a win-win deal. But you've got to know it. You can't do it if you don't know what people want. That's why the embassy is so important.
We had some questions prepared. I'm just looking through, and I feel we're touching already on many of them as we talk. Talk about common pitfalls for academics, but or really any negotiator you experience. So, what are the most common mistakes or blind spots you find during your negotiation training?
We go through life mostly thinking about ourselves, how we're doing, what we think, what we want for lunch. We're not really interested in other people, and academics also not. I would say that's a pitfall, is a big ego, which you see a lot in academics. I think academics are pretty hierarchical. So they're trying to think of power in the sense of what title do I have, which I don't think is an important source of power, not nearly as important as am I in a hurry? Do I have alternatives? Do I have a command of technology in these days more and more? Those are very different sources of power. So the academics are very focused on position, I find, in title and all of that. That's a pitfall if you get stuck on that. What else? They can be pretty stubborn. Well, the hierarchy thing is very damaging, especially if you have doctoral candidates with supervisors. And we work a lot with that, with super. How do you deal with someone that is 30 years older and has published all over the place and doesn't take you seriously, especially if you're female? And how do you do that? And so we work a little with how do you assert power from below. And that's harder to do in academics than in business or in diplomacy, I found.
Because people are more protective for their status?
They're more, it's everyone is protecting their title, their fief, their domain. And, if you're too pushy as a young doctoral candidate and, they feel threatened. So they don't want that. Whereas if you don't have that quite so much in the business world.
Yeah, I once had a training on female leadership or leadership for female researchers. And one just newly baked, or how do you say that? Like they just got into the position of being a group leader at the institute, and then she thought it was a good idea to bring her PhD students to the course. We're like, whoa, I don't know. I mean, it can be if I had known, I could have prepared for that. But then obviously, like I feel like the person constantly acted to protect her status, and then unknowingly wasn't able to unpack what we were about to discuss in the course, or what we were meant to discuss, because she didn't want to disrupt the image she thought she needed.
Yeah. Reputation. It's reputation, it's hierarchical power, it's one-upmanship, being a little better, a little smarter than the next one. Those are real strong in academics. All of that exists in the other things as well, but not as because there's no money. That's the thing. When you take the money out, you fight about other stuff.
Yeah. So let's take this for an example, because that's a common issue that you find in academia, that early career researchers tend to be under even more pressure than academics already are, because of the hierarchical statuses and not getting opportunities where they should have them, or being seen as too junior, too unknowing to what. So how can you give advice on how both parties can approach each other to let go of their armor? Like the early career researchers or junior professionals. You can also choose another sector to report from. Like, how do junior professionals and senior professionals work together, like circumventing the hierarchy game?
Well, again, power is much bigger than hierarchy. Hierarchy is only one source of power, and it's not that important. I think I've learned that very senior academic people who are, supervisors of dissertations, don't have that much power. But yes, they can say yes or no. But the content is all coming from below. It's the researcher or the doctoral candidate that is creating new content that's exciting, and then the supervisor tries to put his name on it and advance his own career. But he's frankly, and I'm at the age now I'm allowed to say this, he's too old for that. He wants to rest and to have a good life, but he still wants to be relevant. And my experience in the academic world, from various perspectives, is the best way to be fresh in the academic world is to have a lot of young people that are creating things that you're not creating. Whether you put your name on it or whether you give them credit is a whole nother issue. But so the power, I think, the power of ideas is very much on the lower end. It's the researcher.
I see a tool that we already have now as a newly introduced tool to the community in academia, where this can be attributed to. Because you mentioned the list of authors on a paper earlier as one way to mark your territory, to mark your hierarchy or your status on your reputation as a scholar. But now, because that has been played out as a power game too often, and is also misleading and non-informative in many cases, we have a tool called, a taxonomy. It's called the credit taxonomy, which aims to give credit where it's due. So you dissect, you can have whichever order by alphabet, whatever. So you mention all the people who contributed to a paper or research project, and then dissect who did what. and state that, like the concept, because the seniors still do valid contributions to paper. They provided the environment, they raised the funds for the project to be financed. They have with the expertise, which again provided the environment for the juniors to tap into the.
Did you create that tool? That sounds fascinating.
No, it's
Did
not,
you create
no, it's not mine, but it was, I mean, it was introduced to the community by various institutional representatives. I can share it with you. It's a credit taxonomy. It's just a new way.
Super idea.
Yeah.
Good way to fight the hierarchical bias, to show that,
So this is also like
everything is
my
built
part of
not by the but it's the people underneath that do the work mostly.
Sure. Yeah, but then even the software developers who normally don't get any credits to a research project, but it's key because it's the algorithm that they developed, which eventually led to the data analysis, which brought about the results in many cases.
Goes back to ancient Egypt. People say the pharaohs built the pyramids. The pharaohs did nothing. The workers built the pyramids.
Yeah, but the pharaohs had the vision for the pyramids. They were in there.
They maybe designed a pyramid, but only a few. We look at history and we always give credit to the top of the tree, and that's human as well, I'm afraid, and that transcends academics.
But the thing is, like, everybody has a role to play, and I think maybe that, I don't know if that's negotiation, but to acknowledge what you came to the table for, what role you're playing, what you're kind of representing and fighting for or playing for. More peaceful approach.
Playing, please. Yes, playing. Because roles, it's like theater, I think. Because you are playing a role, and you don't take it so seriously. It's not fighting.
Yeah, it's not personal. It's for the bigger cause at the end of the day. True. Wow, that's a game shift or a perspective shift. Like, why?
Oh, it's a dance. We use the dance metaphor a lot as well.
It's like also, let me just tell the listeners. So, was it just a couple of weeks ago that we met again here in Berlin at an event to celebrate the Mercator?
Yeah, okay.
Where I was lucky enough to attend again an event of yours, where you introduced dancing as a way to negotiate or as a playful engagement, some sort, which also has parallels to the negotiation process. Do you want to expand on that and why you're doing that in your time?
I wrote a piece for the Harvard Journal years ago called Negotiation as a Dance. And it looked at, actually what was interesting there, it looked at capoeira, which is a Brazilian form of both fighting and dancing at the same time. Because it's competitive and it's got moves, but they don't hurt each other. And I thought that was a really good metaphor for negotiation. And so what I and my co-author did, we went to Kreuzberg and took lessons in capoeira, just to understand what it is. And then we wrote this piece, and it's very playful, as a lot of writing is, and it just says that if you think of it as a dance that has choreography, that has rules, and where you move and where you get to know someone and have fun, it's a very different mentality from win-lose, this is soccer, I hit a goal, you don't. And it's a mindset thing. So it's a metaphor, and metaphors are powerful. But I think we think about playing, we think about dance, we don't think about, eating the other side or subduing them or that's not the language that I use. Because we think the results are better, if you think that way.
Wow. I also mentioned to you then, I don't know if you remember, that I started karate recently. So I had just started when I took that or attended that workshop. And I saw so many parallels because like capoeira or dancing, also karate, or maybe karate and capoeira are similar because people needed to fight for their lives and then couldn't practice openly because then the oppressors were still omnipresent, might have caught them practicing and then just cut it short. But so they practice disguising the skill in some art form. Like
well, the slaves disguised was the other way around. The slaves disguised their fights when the masters in Brazil came, were inside. They would pretend they were dancing, but it really was a fight. So
Yeah.
it's, I don't know where the line is, you know, there is.
No, with karate is similar because they were taken away the weapon, or they were not allowed to use weapons to defend, or they were taken away all the weapons, so they had to use like whatever they had as fishermen and farmers as weapons, if at all, or learn how to fight without weapons, and that's basically the whole theory with karate.
And we do fight. I mean, there is a competitive urge. I'm not questioning that.
It's
But it's if you can
competitive, but it's
handle
more
that.
defensive in a sense. So it's not, well, anyway, so that's not, yeah. So, but okay, but what you showed in the class, which was more Latin dance, or classic and Latin dance, in the workshop that I attended.
Well,
And
what we did, these are professional dancers. They are the bronze medalists in Germany for
yeah.
ballroom dance. So they are professional dancers, but they understand what we're doing. And so they have joined us as an additional way to express what we're trying to teach. And I love them. I think they're great. And we actually got the whole room to dance at Mercato.
Yeah,
There,
and like I'm not a kind of fun dancer. Like I'm not the first one to jump up off my chair, but this was really fun. And what I love about it, and I think where I see the parallels karate and capoeira as well, is the engagement and the shift, how it can so easily shift from aggressive to harmonious and back, based on how you move, based on what the surrounding is, based on, you know, all the factors that
Look
influence.
at flamenco. Flamenco is very positional. It's very firm. And I'm telling you what I want. You know, the movements are very, very martial, really. But then you go from there to other dances that are more flowing. So it's not that dance is always collaborative, always, you know, there's tension because, and that's exciting. That's what makes it interesting, that there's tension in a dance, you know, it's not just,
Yeah. So it's a whole
anyway, so
thing
much.
with negotiation really about abstracting our personas from what we're trying to achieve and making it less personal, more communal. Like, what are we trying to do?
I would agree with that, yeah. Without forgetting why you're there, knowing what you want, don't give it up, don't forget about it. But let go of it and listen to what they want. Not because you're in church or because you're doing charity work, but because you need them. There's an interdependence. And so you need to take them seriously. Say no to the position. I'm not doing that, but I say yes to your interest, you know.
But also, the persona, I mean, not, I don't think we should abstract the persona 100% because we're there for a reason. It's us who are invested in the course in the first place. So it is personal, but we shouldn't dispute.
And it's partisan. You're not mediating. It's not peace building. You are negotiating. You're trying to get something for your home front, whoever sent you, and you'll be judged as to whether you got it or not. So it is competitive.
Oh, that. I was going to say, as you mentioned, peace building. Okay, what's the difference now to negotiation? But yeah, that's clear.
Peace building is more, it's more like mediation and more like solving a conflict from above or from outside. You're not you're not one of the players. You're trying to bring the players together. It's a very different dynamic. Same ideas, a lot of the same things that you have at Harvard, the positions and interests, the icebergs, the empathy, all that matters there too. But you're not in one of the you're not one of the parties. That's very different.
Wow. Okay. So we've covered quite a lot of ground already, and we could, I mean, I could just give a few examples, and if you want, we can just, exercise one of it as a sample, like how could this play out in a negotiation setting?
If we can do it in 5 or 10 minutes, that would be great.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Time.
Yeah.
Or not, or we have a follow-up discussion diving into a deep
I can do that as well.
topic more deeply. But there's, just to mention, there's various examples within academia, like in other sectors, where negotiation plays a key role. Do you think, generally speaking, before I mention these, that negotiation is like now that I know you and I know your skills and how you transfer them through your trainings, do you think we're not embracing negotiation as much as we should, especially now looking at the political arena, but also in day-to-day settings?
I think it's changing quite a lot. I mean, in the last 20, 30 years, it's become a major industry. I mean, I go to conferences with hundreds of people that teach negotiation and do negotiation, and that didn't exist a long time ago. But it's very cultural. The Americans are much more advanced with it than the Germans, for instance. There's a lot of academic writing about it. There's a lot of, it's a Denkfabrik. It's a collection of ideas. It's intellectual, and that's why I like it, and practical at the same time. It's not just intellectual.
Yeah. So here's some homework for our listeners, not you anymore. Thanks for sharing all your, that wisdom that you shared today with us. There's much more, and no for sure, to explore. But for researchers, for example, we can look at collaborative projects, how to engage with your project partners, negotiating the roles, responsibilities, and who's contributing what to the project. Funding, when it comes to funding, securing the grants in the first place. Why should a funder invest in your research idea in the first place? And what's the general interest for society? Which agency to seek funding from is also a matter of concern on dealing with
it. Are you housing the project, which, whose name is on it? Those are all points of
authorship, access to resources. Once you have the funding, who should access and how should the money be distributed amongst the stakeholders? I was going to say shareholders, project partners. Intellectual property, obviously, work-life balance, negotiating the workload to be able to cater also for family and friends, like the life outside the ivory tower, which is part of us. Career development, discussions about being promoted, tenure track or not, leaving academia, like these are all things to consider and negotiate about. Librarians have other topics to engage, like access to scholarly resources, negotiating subscription prices and access to databases, journals and books. That's what librarians are very busy with these days, or in the past couple of years, and now moving forward, things keep changing and shifting. Open access agreements, institutional support for the very library, besides all the other expenses an institution might have. So fight for your own position and justifying that in a digital era. But I'm sure that, I know for a fact, because I train a lot of librarians also, that there is a lot of arguments that you could push forward, which are not as obvious. But even the librarians themselves, they have a skill set and that could own to negotiate for their what's the word, relevance at the institution. Because some, I think,
that's quite a menu you have. Those are all good things.
And of course we have publishers, again, publication fees. So from the other end of the table, editorial decisions, contractual agreements, and then research group leaders have their own set of policymakers. The list goes on. So each scholarly stakeholder. But this is something that I've committed myself to explore further, and I bounce every now and then by you, Mark. And whenever you see an opportunity and interest and also capacity to actually engage in any of this, we'll hear from you again.
And we'll keep my eyes open. Very, very relevant topics. Absolutely.
Thank you for doing such important work in such a playful and joyful manner also. Always exciting to see your workshops and your activities. Thanks for doing that.
Thanks so much. Delighted to be here. Appreciate it.
See you soon.
Thanks for joining us to listen to this episode. Do let us know what you think. You can email us or connect with us on our social media channels, which you can find on our website at accesstoperspectives.org. Email us at info@accesstoperspectives.org or book a call to explore how we can support you with your research planning, management, and publishing. Welcome you again soon for our next episode. Until then, have a great time.